Welcome back to Dark Night Scare. In today's video, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories about creepy encounters in Appalachia. So, grab your headphones, turn down the lights, and get ready. And please subscribe and like this video. Thank you all. Now let's start. I used to work as a wildlife surveyor, often alone, covering vast stretches of old logging roads deep in the Blue Ridge foothills. The work wasn't glamorous. It was usually just me, the mud, and stacks of wet log sheets I had to keep protected. Still, I liked the quiet and the feeling of being completely alone for miles. One morning, I pulled off the road where the gravel ended, leaving it behind where it turned into a confusing maze of ruts and shallow gullies. After turning off the engine, climbing out, and slinging my equipment bag, I started the walk into the area. Getting to the actual survey point always took longer than it should, my boots slipping on spots where water seeped up onto old tire tracks, and I constantly had to stop to wipe the wet grit off my GPS screen. Occasionally, I'd hear a bird call, or the faint sound of something moving in the trees, but mostly it was just silence. By late afternoon, I finished logging the last coordinates and started heading back toward my truck. My legs felt heavy, that dull tiredness you get after hours of picking your way over roots and rocks. My hands had gone stiff from flipping through damp log sheets. The air was cooling quickly, so much so that when I exhaled, I could see my breath forming little clouds. About a quarter mile from where I'd parked, I noticed something odd. All the boot prints I'd made that morning seemed to have vanished. The mud was still soft, the kind that usually holds impressions for days, but now it looked freshly smoothed over, almost like someone had come behind me and deliberately flattened the surface with a board. I crouched down, expecting to feel some sign of disturbance, maybe claw marks or patterns from water runoff. But there was nothing, just a cool, even layer of mud covering everything. It felt like I'd left no trace at all. I stood up, adjusted my pack, and felt my pulse beating against the side of my neck. I started walking again, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd misremembered the spot, or perhaps runoff from the hillside had covered the tracks. But it felt wrong, like the ground itself had been reset. A little further on, the trail camera I'd mounted that morning was missing. The metal bracket was still attached to the birch tree, but the screws were bent out at awkward angles, looking like someone had ripped them out by hand. A few frayed plastic wires dangled in the breeze. Even the little battery compartment was open. The camera wasn't lightweight, and it wasn't cheap, which made my second concern the fact that it was simply gone, outweighing the initial oddity of the missing tracks. I unzipped the chest pocket of my vest, pulled out the radio, and before I could even press the transmit button, a voice crackled through. It was low, clipped, and distorted enough that I couldn't identify who it belonged to. "Don't leave yet." My whole body went rigid. For a second, I couldn't draw a breath. That channel was supposed to be closed, only for survey teams and forestry, rangers. No one else should have been on it. I thumbed the mic. "Who is this? Identify." Nothing came back but the hiss of an open frequency. I turned slowly, scanning the trees and the slopes beyond the gullies. Everything looked exactly the same. Dead leaves, bare branches, no movement. Then again I called out, my voice tighter than I intended. "This is Survey 2, identify." Still nothing. I clipped the radio back onto my harness and started walking, faster. One hand on my pack strap, the other hovering near the knife on my belt. My boots made more noise than I wanted, each step sounding like an announcement to whoever might be listening. A little way ahead, the trail split into two branches. I stopped squinting. The left path dipped down toward a stream I didn't remember seeing, while the right fork angled uphill into thicker trees. My notes were clear. No forks, just a single trail leading straight out to the clearing where I'd left my truck. I turned and looked back over my shoulder. Part of me half expected the path behind me to be gone too, or changed into something unrecognizable, but it was still there. Leaves churned up just as I'd left them. The left fork seemed more familiar for some reason, so I followed it. My boots slipped on patches of loose shale, and the air grew colder the farther I went down. The drop in temperature felt deliberate, like walking into a basement you didn't know was there. Halfway down, something caught my eye near the base of an oak tree. I slowed for a better look. My missing trail camera was propped in the crook of a large branch, lens facing the path, as if waiting for me to notice. I crouched down and picked it up. The camera was intact. The mount had been carefully unscrewed. Even the little battery compartment was closed. I flipped it open and started scrolling through the images. Most were the usual empty frames, tripped by moving branches. Then, I hit the last picture, time-stamped maybe 45 minutes earlier. It showed a figure standing square in the middle of the trail. No face I could make out, just a shape in a heavy hooded coat, arms dangling straight down. I shut the camera and jammed it into my pack. When I looked up again, there was someone standing, farther down the trail between two poplars. They were perfectly still, no features visible, no movement. I didn't say anything. I eased back a step, then another. My breathing felt too loud. The figure stayed exactly where it was. I turned and started up the slope, trying not to slip on the loose shale. My heart was hammering so hard it made my vision pulse at the edges. At the top, I stopped to look back. The figure was gone. I unhooked the radio again. My fingers were clumsy with adrenaline, and it took me a second to press transmit. This is Survey 2. I need assistance at Sector 4 trailhead. Possible trespasser. A burst of static crackled back. Then a voice, thin and dry like someone who hadn't spoken out loud in years, said, "You're not done." I dropped the radio. It bounced once and landed in the mud. I bent to pick it up, but before my hand closed around it, another voice came from behind me, closer than the last one. "Don't pick that up." I turned so fast my pack nearly swung me off balance. Nothing was there, just trees and a line of old fence posts leaning into the brush. I backed away, keeping my eyes locked on the spot where the voice had come from. My only thought was to get back to the truck before something else decided to step out of the trees. The trail funneled between two ridges, and I realized the path wasn't straight anymore. It hooked left, deeper into a hollow I'd never seen on any map. I knew I should have turned around, but I didn't. I kept going, knife in hand, trying to convince myself I was just turned around and overtired. A few minutes later, I came around a bend and saw fresh prints in the mud. Bare feet, long, narrow toes spread wide. They weren't mine. I sidestepped them and kept walking, feeling sweat gather under my collar despite the cold. 20 yards on, I spotted something low and broken through the trees. A collapsed cabin with the roof caved in, timbers slanting like old ribs. I'd never seen any structure in this sector. Someone had cleared the doorway, piling the debris in two neat stacks. I edged closer, just enough to see inside. Something shifted behind the far wall, a soft scraping like skin dragging over old boards. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, half sliding up the slope until the first glint of my truck's windshield flashed through the trees. My lungs felt shredded, my ears buzzed with my own heartbeat. I burst out onto the gravel, knees almost giving out. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I looked back one last time. The trail was empty. No voices, no movement. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. No matter how hard I gripped the wheel. When I drove away, I didn't look in the mirrors. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through the photos on that recovered camera. The last image had changed. The figure was closer to the lens. The hood had slipped just enough to show part of a face, pale skin, and a mouth pulled too wide to ever close properly. I filed my report the next morning. The reply was polite but skeptical. Nobody offered to come along to check it out. I haven't set foot in that sector since. A I'm 34 years old. Let's begin now. I took a long weekend. Figured I'd hit the mountains, camp a bit, hike a little, let my brain deflate. Just me, the trees, and silence. That sounded perfect. I chose this trail I'd read about on some hiking forum, Ridgeway Loop. People said it was a moderate hike with a few good overlooks. And the best part, not a lot of foot traffic. Honestly, that last bit sold me. I wasn't in the mood to make small talk with strangers in moisture-wicking shorts. I threw my gear in the back of my old Jeep before sunrise and drove 5 hours. The towns got smaller, the roads got narrower, and then finally it was just me, and green hills rolling like waves. I could almost feel the stress unclenching from my shoulders as I drove deeper in. When I pulled up to the trailhead, the lot was empty, not another car in sight. Normally, I'm not thrilled about total isolation because, serial killers. But that day, it felt like a gift. I parked, stretched, checked my map, and hoisted on my pack. The air hit me first, cool, clean, and sharp, like it had never been breathed before. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about work, wasn't thinking about anything but how good it felt just to be out there. The first couple of miles were easy. The trail wound through these tall, straight trees, their trunks like pillars holding up the sky. The ground was soft with old leaves, the kind that crunch just enough to remind you you're out in the wild, but not so much that you feel like an intruder. By midday, I came across a little creek with water so clear it looked fake. Figured that was my sign to set up camp. I pitched the tent, boiled some noodles on my camp stove, and ate sitting on a flat rock. The only sound was water sliding over stones. No cars, no voices, no endless hum of computers. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you wonder why you live any other way. That night, I made a small fire and stared at it until the stars blinked on. It felt good, simple, like life had dialed back to something I could handle. When my eyes started to droop, I crawled into my tent, zipped the flap, and let the stillness swallow me whole. The next morning, I woke up early. The air had that sharp bite that makes you feel alive. So, I grabbed a light day pack with some water and snacks and decided to hike higher up the ridge to find one of those overlooks the map bragged about. The climb was steeper than I expected, but my legs were eating it up. My lungs burned in a good way, and for a while, I forgot why I'd even come out there in the first place. That was until the trail markers disappeared. At first, I figured I just missed one. No big deal. I walked back a few steps, scanned the trees for that bright orange blaze. Nothing. I shrugged. Trails don't just end, right? The dirt path was still under my boots, worn and clear, so I trusted it. That's when it got weird. The first thing I saw was the rope just hanging from a tree branch like some old sad noose. It looked wrong. The rope was frayed, blackened like it had been through a fire. The branch above it was scorched in this perfect ring, as if someone had set a torch to just that spot and walked away. I stood there staring at it way too long, thinking, who does that? Who burns one branch and leaves? The rope? I kept moving, but slower now. The next thing was bones scattered across the dirt, pale as chalk. Not a full skeleton, just pieces. A rib, something that looked like a femur, except it was too long, stretched thin in a way that didn't look right. My brain said, deer. My gut said no. After that, the silence changed. It didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, like it had weight pressing on my ears. Even my footsteps sounded wrong, too sharp, too loud, like they didn't belong there. That's when I told myself enough. You've seen plenty. Time to head back. So, I turned around and realized nothing behind me looked the same. The slope was steeper, the trees were closer, crowded, like they were leaning in, boxing me. I couldn't see the rope, couldn't see the bones, couldn't see anything familiar. And then I heard it. Not footsteps, not an animal. Breathing, slow, deliberate breathing, dragging air like it was syrup. Then the exhale, wet and ragged, like it was scraping something raw inside. I froze, every muscle locked. It came again closer this time, and then something else, a low mumble. Not words I knew, just broken sounds, like someone trying to copy human speech and failing. My skin went cold. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but I couldn't move. Not until I heard the third sound, wood creaking like something, huge, shifting its weight against a tree. I bolted. Branches slapped my arms, snapped against my face, but I didn't care. My lungs burned. My legs begged to quit, but I didn't stop. I didn't even know if I was on a trail anymore. I just kept moving, tearing through brush, ripped my hands open on rocks, and still I ran. My heart was hammering like it wanted out. Then blue, my tarp, my campsite. I stumbled into the clearing, grabbed my pack with shaking hands, and didn't bother with the tent, didn't put out the fire. I just slung the straps over my shoulders and ran downhill like the forest was collapsing behind me. And then I made the mistake of looking back. Up the ridge, between two trees, something stood. It was tall, too tall. Its head nearly brushed the branches. Its arms hung past its knees, long and thin, like someone had stretched them wrong. Its skin was the color of wet bark, and its head tilted at an angle no neck should allow. Cocked like a dog hearing something it doesn't understand, then its mouth opened. No roar, no growl, just my name, drawn out in a voice that sounded broken, dragged over teeth, mangled into something almost human. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes of green, the taste of blood in my mouth from biting my tongue, the pounding in my skull as I ran. I didn't stop until the trees spat me out onto a gravel road. By the time I stumbled into the ranger station, I was half delirious. They told me I'd gone 7 miles off any marked trail, asked if I'd seen bears. I just shook my head. I didn't tell them what I saw, didn't have the words. I got in my Jeep and drove until those mountains were just a smear in my rear view. I was hiking a remote stretch of trail down in southern West Virginia when it happened. I'd been planning the trip for weeks. I needed that. I parked at the trailhead around 9 in the morning. Blue sky, cool air that hit like a wake-up slap. The first few miles were easy. Gentle slopes, big stretches where you can see forever through the trees. Birds chattering like they had gossip to share. I remember thinking, this is perfect. Like I'd picked the exact right spot to disappear for a bit. By early afternoon, I passed this old fire tower, totally out of use, all rusted and broken, like something left behind after the world ended. Its metal frame stuck up through the tree line, and for some reason, I thought about climbing it just for the view. I didn't. Something about it felt wrong, like if I touched it, the whole thing would come down on top of me. So I kept walking. That's when I noticed the footprints. At first, it didn't register. The trail had been empty all day, no parked cars where I started, no hikers passing by. So when I saw them, I stopped. They were in this soft patch of mud where water must have pooled after rain. Looked like boot prints at a glance, but when I crouched down, something about them made my stomach flip. The heel was too narrow. The toes stretched out long like someone had pulled the front of the boot like taffy. And the tread. God, the tread was warped. Not worn down like old shoes, but twisted, melted, almost like heat had messed with the pattern and left it warped in the dirt. And the worst part, they were fresh. Edges sharp, soil still damp inside the grooves. Whoever left them wasn't far. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe some hunter with custom boots. Maybe even just a weird angle messing with my eyes. Still, my brain wouldn't shut up about it, so I picked up the pace. By 4, I hit a fork. One trail dipped toward a stream. The other climbed a ridge. The map said the shelter was up past the ridge. So I started climbing. Each step felt heavier, like my pack had doubled in weight. The higher I went, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of my boots and my own heartbeat drumming behind my ribs. Halfway up, I stopped cold. The footprints were back. Same warped shape, same freaky narrow heel and stretched toe, except this time they were ahead of me again, sunk deep into the mud, like something heavier had walked through. I followed them a little, just trying to make sense of it. And then they just stopped right there in the middle of the trail. No rocks to step on, no other tracks. Leading off, just gone like the thing or person walked 10 feet in front of me and then evaporated. I stood there way too long, just staring, waiting for my brain to offer some kind of explanation. All I kept thinking was, things don't just vanish. When I finally reached the ridge, the sun was bleeding out fast. The shelter sat in this clearing, weathered, old, but solid. Roof still on. Big wooden platform for sleeping. A blackened fire ring out front. No sign of anyone else. That should make me feel better. It didn't. I dropped my pack and went through the motions. Filter water, boil noodles, hang the food bag in a tree like you're supposed to. Everything felt mechanical, like I was just playing at being calm. By the time I crawled into my sleeping bag, night had swallowed the whole clearing. I must have fallen asleep, because the sound hit me out of nowhere. Soft, dragging, slow, like something brushing along the outside wall of the shelter. I froze. My breathing went shallow on instinct, like that would make me invisible. Whatever it was, circled the shelter step by step. I could feel the vibrations in the wood under me. When it got to the back wall, the sound changed. Sharp, hollow pops like two stones knocking together in an uneven rhythm. Click, 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 pause, then silence. I don't know how long I laid there before reaching for my headlamp. My hands shook so bad I couldn't hit the switch at first. When the beam finally cut through the dark, I swept it across the clearing. And that's when I saw it, just at the edge of the light. Tall, too tall. Its body was stretched out, limbs hanging long with joints bending in ways joints shouldn't bend, skin pale and tight like plastic wrap over sticks. And the head, that's what burned into me. Narrow at the top, wide at the jaw, and a mouth full of teeth catching the light. Even though its lips weren't moving, it tilted its head slow and sharp, like a bird. And then the clicking started again, but its mouth stayed shut. The sound wasn't just coming from it anymore. It was in the trees, in the ground, everywhere. I moved backward, slow toward my pack. Never took my eyes off it. Every step felt like an hour. The thing didn't move, just stood there, head twitching, in these tiny jerks like it was studying me, deciding something. When my hand hit the straps, I grabbed the pack and ran. I didn't even try to find the trail. I plowed straight into the trees, crashing through brush, branches ripping at my clothes. Behind me, snaps, cracks, too many for one thing. The clicking followed louder, faster until it sounded like 100 teeth chattering in the dark. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs felt like fire. My legs turned to hollow sticks. When I stumbled into a stream, I didn't even think. I just waded in up to my knees and followed it downstream, water freezing against my skin until I saw the glint of a guardrail through the trees. When I climbed up onto that road, my legs nearly gave out. A truck came by about an hour later. Driver didn't ask much, just stared at me through the rear view while I shook in the back seat like a busted engine. I never went back for my gear. 2 days later, a ranger called. They found my food, bags still hanging in the tree, but not the shelter. I thought he meant it burned down. Nope. He said there was nothing there. I was 31 when my Uncle Robert handed me the keys to his cabin way up in the Blue Ridge foothills, just past a town called Marlow Creek. He called it a good place to clear your head. I hadn't taken a real vacation in close to a year. Work had me, pinned to my desk so long that I'd started measuring my life in coffee refills and pointless conference calls. So, when he pressed that old brass key into my hand, I didn't ask any questions. I just told him I'd go. The drive took most of the afternoon. Once I passed the last gas station, some place with a faded sign that just said Raise, the road got narrower, and rougher, and then it just sort of gave up. Asphalt turned to loose gravel, and the trees pressed on either side like they'd been waiting to swallow the car. No cell signal, no street signs. I half expected to see a hand-painted board that read, "Turn back," nailed to a tree trunk. I kept going. The track wound uphill, curling around boulders and stands of laurel. Just when I was sure I'd missed a turn, the tin roof appeared through the branches, dull silver under the late light. I pulled up next to the porch, killed the engine, and just sat there for a minute, listening to the quiet press in. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, just one story, front porch sagging in the middle. The screen door hanging at a tilt, 2 windows on either side, glass so dusty I could barely see through. The steps moaned under my weight as I climbed them. I put the key in the lock, twisted it, and pushed the door open. It swung wide on rusty hinges with a long groan that raised the hair on my arms. I remember thinking it sounded almost resentful, like the cabin didn't want me there. Inside, it was exactly as Robert had left it. A coil of rope hanging from a hook by the door, a neat row of canned peaches and beans on the shelf, a ceramic lamp on the side table with a crack spiraling down the base. I set my duffel on the couch, which was about as comfortable as a sack, of rocks, and walked through the rooms to make sure nobody had broken in. Everything was undisturbed, but the air smelled stale, a mix of cedar and something older that reminded me of damp basement. I tried not to dwell on it. In the back room, I unrolled my sleeping bag on the narrow iron bed. A framed photo hung above the headboard. Robert and his hunting buddy, both in bright orange vests, grinning over a black bear. I'd seen that picture at every family gathering since I was a kid. But that night, I noticed the other man's smile was just off, like someone had told him how to smile, but forgot to explain what it meant. The teeth were there, the curve of the mouth, but no real warmth behind it. I rubbed the back of my neck and decided I was overtired. Maybe I was just primed to see things wrong after the long drive. The cabin didn't have electricity. There was a propane lantern on the counter, so I lit it carefully, trying not to burn my thumb. The mantle hissed and flared, throwing jumpy shadows across the walls. I held it near the front window and saw the frame was crooked. One corner hung a half-inch higher, letting in a thin wedge of cold air. I pressed it shut and folded up a napkin to wedge into the gap. By then, dusk had crept in. The trees outside dissolved into one big dark shape, pressing against the glass. I heated up a can of soup, ate it standing by the counter and washed, the spoon in an old plastic basin. My eyes kept drifting back to that window, half expecting to see something looking in. After 9, I tried reading a paperback. I'd brought a detective novel I didn't care about. My eyes slid off the words line after line. The quiet in that cabin didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a held breath. No passing cars, no music, just the slow tick of my watch and the occasional creak of the rafters settling. Every time I thought I was getting used to it, another little groan or pop would remind me how alone I was. I lay down eventually, convinced I'd fall asleep from sheer exhaustion, but my shoulders wouldn't unclench. My chest felt tight, like I was bracing for something I couldn't name. At some point past midnight, a noise snapped me awake. Not loud, just a scuff, like a boot sliding across dirt right outside the wall. I strained to hear. Then a single footstep landed, heavy enough that I felt the floorboard dip under the bed. My breath stopped. Another step, then nothing. I inched toward the window and wiped a streak in the grime with the side of my hand. Someone stood at the bottom of the steps, shoulders hunched forward, head dipped low under the brim of a hat. Or maybe it was just hair hanging in front of their face. I couldn't tell. I didn't dare breathe. They slowly lifted their head, and even through the filmy glass, I could see they were staring right at me. "You can come out now," they said. The voice was flat, like they were reciting something they didn't fully understand. I stayed frozen. The boards creaked again, one step up onto the porch. "It's all right," they called closer. "Come outside." My mouth felt like it had turned to sand. I edged back from the window, careful not to bump the wall. Another step. I crept toward the back door, pressing my ear to it. Nothing on the other side, no movement. I counted to 3 in my head. Then I threw the door open. Nothing but trees and my own tracks leading in. I ran. I didn't even think about grabbing my pack. My boots skidded in the mud and my shoulder clipped the porch post hard enough to send a hot ache down my spine. I kept going. The slope dropped, off fast, and I half stumbled, half sprinted through the underbrush. Branches lashed my arms, but I barely felt it. My chest burned with every breath. When I broke out onto the logging road, I didn't stop. I just fumbled for my keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. By the time I jammed the right one into the lock, I felt like I was going to throw up. I got the engine started and threw the car into gear. I drove fast, trying to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. My only thought was to get back to the city, away from the quiet, away from the way the trees seemed to listen. I didn't look in the mirrors. Later that night, I finally reached the highway. I pulled over, engine idling, and stared into the trees. Nothing moved, no sound at all. I thought about going back for the last few boxes, maybe just to prove to myself it wasn't as bad as it felt. But when I pictured that figure standing there in the dark, something in my gut clenched up tight. I turned back onto the road and didn't slow down again until I hit the outskirts of Millerton. I didn't report any of it. It was the last time I was ever alone in those mountains. My parents owned this old cabin way out in the Appalachian foothills. My grandfather built it before paved roads even reached that area. If you want to find it, you have to follow a dirt track for what feels like forever, then hike another half-mile on foot. It's isolated in the purest sense. The cabin itself is basic. 1 room, creaky wooden floor, an old wood stove for heat, and a propane lantern for light. That's it. No electricity, no plumbing, and definitely no cell service. It's the sort of place where you learn real quick how much noise your own breathing makes when the world goes quiet. My parents mostly use it during hunting season, and the rest of the year it just sits out there collecting dust and probably raccoon footprints. I've been out there plenty of times, always with family or a couple of friends, but this time I decided to go alone. I just finished one of those brutal stretches at school where you don't know what day is anymore. 3 weeks of no real sleep, mainlining coffee, and submitting papers at 3 a.m. My brain was fried. I didn't want to see another screen or hear another notification. I just wanted silence, and the cabin is perfect for that. Friday afternoon, I parked at the end of the track. Can't drive the whole way unless you have a death wish for your car suspension. Slung my pack over my shoulder and hiked in. It was one of those hikes where you realize how much crap you packed about 5 minutes in. When I finally saw the cabin, through the trees, this wave of calm hit me, like stepping off the grid in the truest sense. The first night was perfect. Lit a fire, cooked something simple, basically a can of chili dumped in a pot, and read by lantern until my eyes felt like sandpaper. Around midnight, I locked up, deadbolt on the door, checked the windows twice. That's a habit out here. When you're surrounded by 100 miles of dark forest, you double-check everything. Then I crashed in the old bed that's been there longer than I've been alive. The next morning, something was wrong. It wasn't a sound or a smell, just this feeling that snagged at me the second I opened my eyes. Took me a second to spot it. The door was unlocked. Now I know I locked that door, not just locked, deadbolted. I remember testing the knob before I went to bed. Out here, you don't half-ass that. But sure enough, the bolt was thrown back. I told myself to ignore it. Maybe I was tired and forgot. Maybe I didn't turn it all the way. That made sense, right? Still, that thought sat in my head all day like a rock in my shoe. By evening, I told myself to drop it. Cooked, cleaned up, and sat on the porch for a while. It's so quiet out there. It messes with your head. Every squirrel sounds like a bear. Every twig snap feels personal. And when the sun goes down, it doesn't fade like in the city. It just drops. Suddenly, the world is black. I locked the door, killed the lamps, and spread my sleeping bag on the couch. For a while, I just stared at the ceiling. listening to the hum of my own ears because that's how quiet it was. Sleep didn't stick. I'd drift, then snap awake, my heart running like it heard something before I did. Could have been nerves. Could have been the old wood popping. I told myself that every time until I heard the scrape. It wasn't loud, just enough to pull me out of half sleep. A slow drag like something sliding against the wall outside. I froze, every muscle locked. My brain ran through excuses. Tree branch, wind, raccoon, anything that made sense. I almost believed it until it came again. Longer this time. Scrape, pause, scrape. Not random, like someone tracing their finger. Slow, deliberate. I slipped out of the sleeping bag, bare feet hitting cold planks. The hatchet I'd used earlier leaned against the wall. My hand went to it without thinking, like my body decided before my brain caught up. I stood there, gripping it so tight my knuckles ached, staring at the door. Then it came again, closer this time, right by the kitchen window. And with it, this sound I wish I could unhear. A breath long, wet, drawn slow against the wood, like something savoring the feel of it. Every instinct screamed one thing: stay silent. I crept toward the kitchen, the boards sighing under my feet, every creak like a gunshot in the quiet. My fingers found the edge of the curtain. I peeled it back a sliver, enough to see nothing, just black on black, my own pale face in the glass. Beyond that, shadows layered on shadows, the kind your eyes want to turn into shapes. And yet I swear something shifted. Not a full figure, just the sense of something moving. Like the night itself took a step closer, the scraping stopped. Silence dropped so heavy it almost rang. When my eyes started to droop, I was inside, rocking gently in this old chair by the stove, half dozing when I heard it. Something stepped onto the porch. Not light steps, heavy, slow. Each board let out this long, aching groan like it didn't want to hold the weight. I froze. My eyes went straight to the door. The boards creaked again, then silence. I didn't even breathe. My pulse was doing that loud thumping thing that makes you feel like it's in your ears. I waited 10 seconds, 20, maybe a full minute. Nothing. Finally, I for the rifle in the corner, trying not to make a sound, and crept to the window. The glass is old and wavy, so everything looks distorted. The yard was just shapes and shadows. I told myself it was a deer or a bear. That made sense, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I locked the door again, checked it twice, and shoved a chair under the handle. Sleep. Forget it. Every creak of the cabin felt amplified. Every pop from the stove sounded like footsteps. Around 3 a.m., my eyes snapped open again, and something felt off. Took me a second to realize why. Light. There was this pale glow sliding across the far wall. Not firelight, not my lantern. It was coming from outside. I sat up slowly, throat dry, and moved to the window. There was something in the yard. At first, I thought my brain was short-circuiting from exhaustion. But then it moved. A figure tall. Wrongly tall. Thin in this broken, almost fragile way. Like a scarecrow someone had stretched. It was just standing there, head tilted back like it was sniffing the air. Its skin, or whatever it had looked grey under the moon, same tone as the trees. Then it turned. Not fast, just this slow, jerky motion, like its joints were in the wrong places until it was facing me, facing the cabin. The moon hit its eyes, then 2 pale glints, metallic. No reflection, no shine, just empty. And then it stood. I don't know how. It shouldn't have been able to, but it did. Slow, smooth, like it was unfolding. Taller than me, taller than the car. Its arms hung so low the fingertips nearly scraped the ground. The clicking didn't stop. It sped up. Faster, faster, like a metronome, losing control. I slammed the door and floored the gas. Gravel spit behind me as the car fishtailed, caught the road, shot forward. I didn't look back until I hit pavement. When I did, It was standing in the middle of the road, perfectly still, watching the headlights disappear. I didn't pull over that night. My cousin Theo had been bugging me for honestly most of my adult life to help clear out the old family cabin tucked away in the Blue Ridge foothills. You know the kind of place. Everyone felt this weird guilt to it, like if they didn't eventually go, it would somehow haunt them. Ellis kept saying it would only take a couple of innings, a quick innings of the roof, maybe shoo a raccoon or two out of the crawl space. He made it sound like we'd be done by innings, eating innings and high F innings, each innings for a job well innings. That July, the stars finally aligned. I took a Friday off work, crammed my backpack full of the usual, extra socks, a couple, bottles of water, the extension cord I always forget I need, and drove out to the smooth asphalt that quickly turned into loose gravel and weeds. The last stretch wasn't much of a road anymore, just a rutted trail that looked like it had been carved by a bulldozer decades ago and never properly maintained. I left the car where the ruts turned into deep channels and started the climb on foot. It's funny, when I was a kid, that trail felt almost magical, like the trees were conspiring to keep you in. This time, they loomed in from both sides, intertwining so close, the sky was just a smudge of pale grey. Cobwebs brushed across my face. There wasn't any breeze, no insect calls, nothing. Just the steady crunch of my boots and the sound of my own breathing getting a little too loud in my ears. I tried telling myself it was the altitude, or maybe just the thickness of the laurel down that hollow, but I'd worked higher ridges before without feeling quite like this, like the woods themselves were watching me walk in. About 20 minutes in, I decided to mark my trail with bright orange tape. I tied the tape high on a young hickory where I'd see it on the way back and told myself it was smart protocol, not paranoia. The moment I stepped away, the extension cord I'd coiled on a branch beside the trail began to writhe. It wasn't a snake, not exactly. More like it was being pulled from beneath, inch by inch, until it lay flat and still again. Ellis hadn't mentioned anything about weird extension cords in his texts. I forced myself to ignore it and kept going. For the next hour, I did my best to convince myself it was all just weird coincidence. Probably an animal, maybe a trick of the light. The longer I spent out there, the more certain I became that I wasn't alone. Every time I stopped to catch my breath, the air felt heavy, like the trees were holding their breath with me. I kept moving, trying to stay ahead of whatever feeling was growing in the back of my mind. There was a rocky bluff off to my left, and I figured if I climbed it, I'd get a better view, and maybe if I was lucky, my extension cord would stop moving. About halfway up, the trail forked into two narrow paths I didn't remember seeing on any of the maps I'd studied before leaving. They looked too deliberate to be game trails. I crouched to examine them, one finger tracing the split against the faint survey lines on my phone screen, trying to convince myself they were just old access roads that never made it onto the official records. Then I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A man stepped out from the right-hand path. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with shoulders that looked permanently stooped, like he'd been standing still for too long. He wore a canvas jacket that might have been olive green once, now the color of old cardboard, and he had long grey hair hanging in ropes down his chest. At first, I thought maybe he hadn't seen me. Then he raised one arm, slow and deliberate, and curled his fingers in a beckoning gesture. I didn't wave back. I didn't say anything. He turned and walked into the trees. I stayed crouched, one knee pressed to the dirt, trying to tell myself he was just another surveyor, maybe a logger, but there was no pack, no tools, no water bottle, and something about the way he moved, like he was acting out a script, made my stomach clench. I knew better than to follow him. Any field manual will tell you, unknown contact, unknown terrain, get out. I followed him anyway. The path narrowed fast. Laurel and saplings pressed in so close the branches scraped my sleeves and tugged at my pack straps. I kept expecting to hear twigs snapping ahead of me, some sign that I was closing the gap, but there was nothing, just my own breath and the drag of my boots through the leaves. The trail ended in a clearing the size of a two-car garage. In the middle stood a squat shed built from rough, unpainted planks, bleached almost white. The corrugated metal roof sagged so deep it nearly touched the door frame. A stack of cinder blocks beside the door had crumbled into a little heap, half swallowed by damp leaves. I circled slowly. The man was gone. The door stood cracked open just enough to show the shelves lining the back wall. Even from the threshold, I counted at least 50 jars, all identical, all lined up in rows. I called out. My voice sounded paper thin, like it didn't belong in that place. No answer. I should have walked away. Instead, I stepped inside. The air was stale in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. I reached for the nearest jar. The glass felt cold and oddly slick under my hand. Inside was a mass of coarse black hair, wrapped tight around a folded scrap of yellowed paper. I turned, it slowly, squinting at the faded label. The top line was a date, August 3rd, 2008, and the bottom was a name I didn't recognize. I put it back exactly where I'd found it. Then I heard it. A slow scrape across the floorboards behind me, like a boot dragging through dust. I turned so fast the shelf rattled under my hand. The doorway was empty, but the orange extension cord I'd seen coiled on the threshold was sliding into the weeds inch by inch, like it was being pulled by something just out of sight. I didn't wait to find out what. I backed out the door, turned, and walked fast. My pulse was hammering in my ears, branches smacked across my chest, and I didn't care. I kept walking. A few minutes later, I couldn't shake the sense the air behind me was heavier. My shoulders kept tensing up like I was bracing for someone to grab them. I finally turned. That's when I saw the figure step onto the trail. They wore a grey hooded jacket. The hood was pulled up, and I couldn't see a face. Their arms hung down too loose, like the joints weren't right. They didn't wave, didn't move closer. They just stood there. My throat closed up so tight I couldn't swallow. I turned back and walked fast. I passed another trail marker nailed to an oak. Edison Hollow Spur, this time. The letters faded enough to read. I clung to the idea that the turnout must be close. My watch said I'd been out there a little over 2 hours. The trail curved again. I told myself I'd see the road. Instead, the same fork appeared on the left. Same narrow path. Same impossible neatness. I didn't think about it. I broke into a run. My pack slammed against my back with every step. I nearly went down more than once. Finally, the trees started to thin. I stumbled into the turnout, gasping. My car was still there, parked crooked by the sign. I fumbled with the keys, got the door unlocked, and threw my pack into the passenger seat. My hands shook so badly, I could barely get the key into the ignition. I didn't look in the mirrors. I drove away, putting as much distance between myself and that place as possible. My only thought was to get back to the city, away from the quiet, away from the way the trees seemed to listen. I didn't look in the mirrors. Later that night, I finally reached the highway. I pulled over, engine idling, and stared into the trees. Nothing moved. No sound at all. I thought about going back for the last few boxes, maybe just to prove to myself it wasn't as bad as it felt. But when I pictured those jars lined up perfectly waiting for me, something in my gut clenched up tight. I turned back onto the road and didn't slow down again until I hit the outskirts of Millerton. I didn't report any of it. It was the last time I was ever alone in those mountains. I'd been on that trail before, but never this far out and never in winter. The cold changes everything out there. The trees were stripped bare, their branches clawing at the grey sky. The ground had that soft, spongy feel from months of rotting leaves. I started out at 10, thinking I'd hit the overlook, maybe eat a sandwich and make it back before the sun dipped. 12, me round trip, 6 up, 6 down. Doable. I'd done harder. About 2 hours in, I noticed the quiet. Not just quieter, silent. The kind of silence that doesn't announce itself. It just happens. 1 minute there's background noise, the tap of a woodpecker, a squirrel kicking leaves, branches creaking in the wind. Then nothing, like someone shut off the sound in the whole world. It didn't hit me right away. I kept walking for a while before it clicked. Then I stopped. Just stood there, with my breath fogging the air, listening. No birds, no wind, not even the distant groan of trees shifting. Just my boots grinding the frozen dirt and my heartbeat, which suddenly felt way too loud. I told myself it wasn't weird. Animals hide in the cold, right? Birds hunker down. Deer stay still. The forest gets quiet, sure, but the way it happened, so sharp, like someone flicked a switch, felt off. It didn't fade gradually. It stopped. The trail tightened as it climbed along a rock face, one of those sections where you really pay attention because one bad step means you're sliding a good 30 ft down into a mess of boulders. On my left, the stone wall was slick with ice, glistening like glass. On the right, the drop waited. If you're not great with heights, it's the kind of view that makes your stomach roll if you look too long. So, I kept my eyes on the ground, counting steps in my head like some kid walking on a balance beam. That's when I saw something dark against the pale ground ahead. At first, I thought it was a scrap of fabric. People lose things out here all the time. Gloves, hats, random trash. But when I got closer, I saw it wasn't fabric. It was hair, a clump of it, black and coarse, matted with something that looked too dark to be mud. Thick strands stuck together like they'd been ripped out, not shed. I squatted down without touching it, just stared. And something about the side of it, just hair, that's all it was, made my stomach knot. It wasn't just the size of the clump. It was the way it lay there, like it didn't belong. Too much for a squirrel, wrong texture for a deer, and definitely not bear. My first thought was a dog. Maybe someone's hunting hound, but there was no blood, no paw prints, nothing. I should have turned around right then. Everything in me knew that, but I didn't. I just kept walking because apparently I have the survival instincts of a wet sock. Another half mile and I saw something else pale against the dark leaves leaning against a fallen log. From a distance, I thought it was a stick, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't wood. It was a bone. Long, smooth, and wrong. Too thin for a deer leg, too clean to be random debris. The ends weren't sharp either. They were worn down, noded to a slick, polished shine. And then I saw the footprints. They were off the trail in a patch of soil that hadn't frozen yet. Big enough to be human, but not right. The toes curled inward, sharp and hooked like claws. The arches were weird too high, like whoever left them didn't walk like we do. That's when the little voice in my head went from, weird, to get the hell out of here. And for a second, I almost did. I almost turned around. But, and this makes no sense, the thought of going back down that trail felt worse than going forward. It was like the silence had weight pressing me toward the overlook. Like if I turned my back, something would follow. The trail ended at the ridge. No more path, just a sheer drop into miles of layered hills, stretching out like a grey-green ocean under a flat sky. I should have felt relieved when I reached the end. Instead, I felt exposed, like standing in a wide-open field during a lightning storm. That's when I heard it behind me. Not footsteps. A dragging sound. Something sliding through the leaves. A long pull. Then a pause. Then again closer. This time I turned. It was standing at the tree line. At first, my brain tried to file it under, man. It was crouched low, arms hanging down so far they almost touched the ground. But then it shifted, and my stomach dropped, because nothing about that shape was right. Too thin, too long. Its skin looked wrong. Not pale exactly, just off. Like stretched leather left out in the rain. Like paper soaked and dried too fast. And the head. Jesus. The head didn't belong to that body. Too big. Too heavy. Hanging forward. Like the neck couldn't handle the weight. It didn't move fast. Just stood there, the spine bending in these slow, horrible arcs, like it had extra joints in the sound. God, that sound. A wet clicking noise over and over, like teeth chattering with no lips to hide them. I started backing toward the cliff, without thinking. Every nerve in my body screamed, "Run!" But my legs felt locked. My breath came short and sharp, like I'd been punched. The thing tilted its head slow and curious, like it was trying to see inside me. Then it dropped flat so fast it looked like gravity just slammed it down, and it started crawling. Not like a person, not like an animal. Its arms and legs bent the wrong way, joints folding and unfolding like a spider, its hooked fingers almost touching the ground even as it ran. Its head hung forward, jaw swinging wide, too wide, like it wasn't attached right. The skin was white, so white it almost glowed, and the eyes two black holes that swallowed everything. I started backing, up, nearly tripping over the edge until I hit the last bend before the gate, the trees finally breaking and the tires hit asphalt. I didn't stop for 20 minutes. When I finally did, shaking so hard I could barely turn the key off. I walked to the back. The tailgate was bent inward. Deep grooves ran along the metal in curling arcs sharp enough to catch a fingernail. I drove straight to my cousins, told them everything. I sold the truck the next week, and I don't take the logging road anymore. My uncle had this old hunting cabin buried so deep in the Appalachian, it might as well have been on another planet. No GPS, no cell signal, just 3 hours from the nearest town, 2 from the closest gas station, and surrounded by a forest that feels older than time. When I called him to ask if I could stay for the weekend, he hesitated. Not long, but enough for me to notice. Then he said, "Sure, don't expect much. It's rough out there." His voice had this tone like he wanted to add something else, but didn't. I laughed and asked, "Anything I should know?" "Yeah," he said. His voice went flat. "Keep the generator off at night. It leaks fuel sometimes," I joked back. "Got it. No explosions. Anything else?" It was his pause long enough that I thought the line dropped. Then, "Don't wander after dark. You'll get turned around out there." That was it. No explanation, no story, just that dead flat warning that stuck with me the whole drive up. The road felt endless, switchbacks curling up the mountains like some kind of snake, ridges black against a sky that couldn't make up its mind about nightfall. By the time I hit the dirt track leading in, the sun was gone. The truck clattered over potholes and loose gravel, trees leaning in so close, my headlights bounced shadows across the windshield. At some point, it stopped feeling like a road and more like a tunnel carved out of the woods. The cabin was smaller than I remembered, hunched against the tree line like it was trying to disappear. I parked, killed the engine, and the silence that fell over us was heavy. No wind, no bugs, no anything. Just stillness pressing in from all sides. Inside, the place smelled like old pine dust and something faintly metallic, like old nails in a damp toolbox. I dumped my bag, made a quick meal on the propane stove, and sat on the porch for a while. It's so quiet out there, it messes with your head. Every squirrel sounds like a bear. Every twig snap feels personal. And when the sun goes down, it just slams down. 1 second, the ridges were silhouettes. The next, they were gone, replaced by black that swallowed everything. I locked the door, killed the lamps, and spread my sleeping bag on the couch. For a while, I just stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of my own ears because that's how quiet it was. Sleep didn't stick. I'd drift, then snap awake, my heart running like it heard something before I did. Could have been nerves. Could have been the old wood popping. I told myself that every time until I heard the scrape. It wasn't loud, just enough to pull me out of half sleep. A slow drag like something sliding against the wall outside. I froze, every muscle locked. My brain ran through excuses, tree branch, wind, raccoon, anything that made sense. I almost believed it until it came again. Longer this time. Scrape, pause, scrape. Not random, like someone tracing their finger. Slow, deliberate. I slipped out of the sleeping bag, bare feet hitting cold planks. The hatchet I'd used earlier leaned against the wall. My hand went to it without thinking, like my body decided before my brain caught up. I stood there, gripping it so tight my knuckles ached, staring at the door. Then it came again, closer this time, right by the kitchen window, and with it, this sound I wish I could unhear. A breath long, wet, drawn slow against the wood like something savoring the feel of it. Every instinct screamed one thing: stay silent. I crept toward the kitchen, the boards sighing under my feet, every creak like a gunshot in the quiet. My fingers found the edge of the curtain. I peeled it back a sliver, enough to see nothing, just black on black. My own pale face in the glass. Beyond that, shadows layered on shadows, the kind your eyes want to turn into shapes. And yet, I swear something shifted. Not a full figure, just the sense of something moving. Like the night itself took a step closer, the scraping stopped. Silence dropped so heavy it almost rang. When my eyes started to droop, I was inside, back against the couch, hatchet across, my knees, eyes on that door, until the first smear of grey touched the windows. When the light was strong enough to see, I finally stepped outside. The yard was slick with dew, the air sharpened my lungs. That's when I saw them. Tracks, not boots, not paws. A straight line from the porch into the trees, each one deep enough to hold water, split in two like hooked blades gouged the earth. I followed them because God helped me. I had to know. They went 30, maybe 40 yards, weaving between pines and undergrowth, and then nothing. The trail just ended. No leaves disturbed, no branches snapped, just an abrupt stop in the middle of nowhere, like whatever made them walked out of existence. That broke something in me. I spun, ran back, packed fast enough I barely remembered zipping the bag and slammed it into the truck bed. When the engine roared, it sounded almost alive, like it wanted to help me get out. The road back was a blur of gravel and curves. I told myself I was fine. I told myself it was over. I clung to that until the last bend before the highway when I saw it. It was there at the tree line, crouched low, watching me go. Its skin was pale, stretched so thin over bones that jutted wrong, like it was built from a blueprint someone crumpled up and tried to smooth back out. Its arms were too long, hands dragging furrows in the dirt like ropes of wet sinew. And its head. God. That head tilted slow as I flew past, jaw opening wider and wider until I swore the whole thing would split in two. I didn't stop, didn't look back.